today we would like to give you a review to prepare you for your final exam. اليوم نقوم بالمراجعة استعدادا للامتحان الأخير. بارك الله فيكم.
So the first chapter we want to talk about today is chapter number 1. Chapter number 1, we discussed management decision making. القرارات عند الإدارة. Okay, عند المدراء. And we discussed management and financial accounting and the differences between the two. You need to know specifically الفرق بين management accounting and financial accounting, and you need to give examples. We also talked about the relevant information. I gave you examples on what is relevant information and things that are not relevant or irrelevant information. So you need to make sure you know these points from chapter number 1. Chapter number 2, we discussed cost behavior, السلوك التكلفة. So we were looking at cost in detail in chapter number 2. The first thing we talked about was variable costs. And we said variable costs are تكلفة متغيرة. We also talked about fixed costs, تكلفة ثابتة. And we also talked about the mixed costs, which include both variable and fixed costs. I also asked you to find the total cost function. So you need to know how to find this function, and you need to know what is included in those components of this function. We also talked about the الأساليب اثنين أسلوبين. We talked about the 2-point method, and we also talked about the high-low method. You need to know how to use both of those methods, and you also need to know why do we use those methods? What is the point? What is the goal? ما هو الغرض لاستخدام هذين أسلوبين? Chapter number 3. We talked about cost allocation. This is the توزيع التكلفة. And التوزيع يعتمد على النسبة. Remember that we use percentages to know how much we allocate. So some of the things we talked about in chapter 3, we talked about the cost object, cost drivers, and cost pools. You need to know what these are. We also talked about indirect and direct costs. And then finally, the most important thing we talked about was the cost allocation methods. And we have the first one, which is direct method. And this is توزيع بشكل مباشرة. And then we also have the step down method, which is a توزيع من وجهين. And we explained this in detail in the chapter. Chapter number 4, we talked about CVP analysis. And the first thing we talked about is the profit. So you need to know how to find profit. Profit اسم ثاني له net income. If you see net income, profit, same meaning. Okay? We also talked about the contribution margin. Okay, the contribution margin, remember, يعتمد على variable. Okay, variable هو الشيء الذي يخص cost contribution margin ratio and contribution margin per unit. Okay, you need to focus on the variable cost. You need to do something with the variable cost. Okay, and we also talked about the break-even point. The break-even point is النقطة إنما يكون الربح صفر. Okay, there is no profit when we have the break-even point. This means revenue and expenses is equal. And we also talked about the margin of safety. Margin of safety is anything more than the break-even point. Okay, كل شيء أكثر من break-even point. Okay, and remember, you need to find this in terms of revenue, also in terms of units. And the last thing is we talked about the pre-tax profit. You need to know how to find the pre-tax profit using the equation we gave you in chapter number 4.